If you think it looks like I've discovered a hidden god mode in Warframe, you're not wrong. I've got a build for Baruuk that makes him unkillable and gives him enough damage to wipe hordes of enemies stronger than anything you'll likely ever face. This is Hardcore Endgame. Okwat Tanzian Wan, my people, and welcome to the Hardcore Endgame build guide for Baruuk. Now, I should warn you, this is arguably the strongest setup in the entire game. It provides more than 95% damage reduction and the ability to one-shot some of the toughest enemies in the game. And I don't mean that it kills them quickly. I mean that you can kill a level 180 Corrupted Bombard with a single attack. With AoE. At range. Let that sink in before you make this build, because, quite frankly, it can make everything else feel a little meh. This setup consists of two builds actually, one for Baruuk and another for his Exalted Fists. It requires 10 total Forma, 1 Orokin Catalyst, and 1 Orokin Reactor. All of the blueprints needed to craft Baruuk are available for purchase with Vox Solaris standing from Little Duck in the secret back room of Fortuna. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you need to complete the Fortuna questline on Venus. Gonna jump over to the build now, and the first thing you might notice is 3 Umbral mods, but before you freak out, only one of them is leveled, so you don't need to burn an Umbral Forma on this setup. The Umbral Vitality and Fiber are only here to boost our maxed out Umbral Intensify to plus 77% ability strength, and leveling them does not increase that boost. It will increase their drain, cost you precious Umbral Forma, and give you a bunch of unnecessary health and armor. And you don't even need to remove one of the D polarities Baruuk comes with if you don't want to. As you can see here, just slot one of the unleveled Umbrals in there. Now you might look at his health and armor values and think I'm insane. There's no way this build works without leveling those Umbral mods. Well, let me explain where Baruuk's survivability comes from, and it's all about damage reduction. His third ability, Desolate Hands, surrounds Baruuk with floating daggers. Each dagger provides 10% damage reduction, up to 90%. With this build, we get a base of 27 daggers when we cast it, and that goes up to 31 daggers if we first use Empower, and then up to 35 daggers if we also have an energy conversion proc. Having more than 9 daggers doesn't increase our damage reduction past 90%, but it does mean we don't have to refresh it as often. The daggers are spent during combat as they seek out enemy firearms and explode on contact. So think of all the extra daggers as bonus duration on the ability, even though we're actually tanking our duration stat. And 90% damage reduction is a ton. That's what Nova gets from Nullstar, and that's what Gara gets from Splinter Storm, and they're both extremely tanky frames. But Baruuk actually goes beyond that, because once we cast Serene Storm and jump into his Exalted Fists, we get another 40%. Some quick maths might have you thinking 90% plus 40% means that you're actually getting healed for 30% of incoming damage. Well, not quite, Good Will Hunting. DR is multiplicative, meaning if you've got 100% damage incoming, it's reduced by 90% to 10, and then that's reduced by 40% to 6. There's also the 205 armor this build provides, and the innate 25% DR on Tenno shields, meaning incoming damage is reduced by more than 95%. Or, another way of saying that is, you do not need to level up the Umbral mods for more health and armor. So now we can talk about what we are using mod slots for. First up is Power Strength, which we get in its raw form from the aforementioned Umbral Intensify, Power Drift, Blind Rage, and Transient Fortitude. Energy Conversion provides another 50% strength to our next ability cast whenever we pick up an Energy Orb. Empower, which we've added to our first ability slot via Helminth, also gives 50% more strength to the next ability cast. You could also put Growing Power in the Aura slot, and it would add yet another 25% strength. But there are two very good reasons to not do that. First, you would need to Forma your Aura slot for V polarity, either with the standard Forma or Aura Forma. Second, the 18% armor strip from Corrosive Projection is more damage, effectively, on high-level enemies. If you actually care about the math, and yes, I've done the math, ask in the comments and I'll explain it to you. Moving on, Prime Flow gives us a monstrous energy pool, and I'll explain why we need that in just a moment. The Reactive Storm Augment for Serene Storm boosts its status chance way above 100% and automatically adjusts its damage type to the weakness of whatever we're attacking. And finally, in the Arcane slots, we have Fury for more raw melee damage, as well as Strike for increased melee attack speed. Before we get into the build for the Exalted Fists, let me explain how this setup works and the ability rotation. First thing you'll want to do when you get in a mission is Xenuric Dash, or drop an Energy Pizza if you're using Naramon, to start filling energy. Then Desolate Hands for that tasty damage reduction. We want to get into Serene Storm ASAP, but in order to do that, we need to erode Baruuk's restraint meter a bit. The fastest way to do that is to hit groups of enemies with his second ability, Lull, which slows enemies in a 25-meter radius for a few seconds, then puts them to sleep. Once you've managed to remove at least 25% of your restraint, go ahead and jump into Serene Storm and start killing enemies en masse. I like to do this for a bit to build up some energy and erode the restraint meter fully by spamming Lull. This is where that prime flow I talked about earlier comes into play. Also, be sure you're refreshing Desolate Hands whenever the dagger count drops below about 15. Now we're ready to drop out of Serene Storm and prepare to reactivate a boosted instance of it. Use Empower first, then pick up an Energy Orb, which will proc both of the plus 50% power strength boosts. Now when you go back into Serene Storm, Desert Wind will do even more damage. Since Serene Storm is a channeled ability, it will retain those buffs for as long as you keep it going. And if you keep refreshing Desolate Hands so you stay alive, as well as eroding the restraint meter with Lull regularly, you can easily keep it up for the remainder of the mission, regardless of how long that lasts. Only thing left now is to go over the Desert Wind build. I've played around with a few different versions, and while they all excel in different scenarios, this is the one that performs best versus super high level enemies. Raw damage from Primed Pressure Point and Spoiled Strike, crit chance and damage from Sacrificial Steel and Organ Shatter, boosted damage to health from Viral procs, courtesy of Primed Fever Strike and North Wind, and a little armor strip from the heat procs provided by Molten Impact. I'm using the final slot for Condition Overload and the huge damage it brings, but you should know that even though Desert Wind sends out a wave of ranged damage, Condition Overload only procs on enemies hit in melee range. I felt it was worth having in the build for two reasons. First, it's nice to have the extra burst to help deal with stuff like Acolytes, Liches, or Sisters. Second, the melee combo counter is also only affected by melee range hits, so if you're trying to eke out every bit of damage, you need to be up close and personal anyway. It's worth noting that Primed Reach nearly quadruples your melee range, and would be a fine replacement for Spoiled Strike here, but that would require an Umbral Forma for Sacrificial Steel, and I just don't feel like it's worth using one on a non-prime frame when the build already stomps. If you want another non-Umbral Forma option, you can drop Sacrificial Steel for the normal True Steel version, and replace Spoiled Strike with Primed Reach. This will give you less damage when your combo is low, but allow you to more easily hit enemies with melee damage, giving both combo and Condition Overload procs. It's a personal preference thing, so do whatever tickles your whiskers. But if you go with the Primed Reach option, I'd recommend using Naramon Focus instead of Xenuric to make it even easier to maintain combo count. And there you have it, that's the entire setup. Now you can go put this build together and then, congratulate yourself on beating the game, I guess. Have fun!